get right to this AP story. We will move from substantive to less substantive as the program continues today, because the implications of this, well, I don't know if you can call it spying, but the secret obtaining of 2 months' worth of telephone records from perhaps over 100 journalists working at the AP, which is part of a year-long investigation into the disclosure of that al-Qaeda plot I mentioned in Yemen, Underwear Bomber 2. It is unclear as to the legality of this. Clearly, the Department of Justice thought what they were doing was legal. That remains to be seen. But it is clearly something that I think is going to draw more attention to the relentless pursuit of leakers by this administration, and I should qualify that by leakers that they did not approve of, because there has been tons of leaks out of this administration, so-called national security leaks, that they have been okay with. However, they have, in an unprecedented fashion, pursued leakers, even those that were supposedly leaked information during the Bush administration. They have gone after them with an unprecedented amount of charges of espionage. It's simply unprecedented. We have talked about it on this program many times before. We have had some of those people on. Robert Greenwald came out with a film in this regard. We spoke to him a couple of weeks ago. We have spoken to Thomas Drake on this program, and to others who have been subjected to nothing short of harassment. And this is creating the implications of this, of course, and not to mention Bradley Manning. The implications of this, of course, have to do not just with the leakers, but with the ability of investigative reporters to report on our ever-increasing national security state in this country. So let's just go through the facts. The AP's president announced on Monday that federal authorities obtained cell, office, and home telephone records of individual reporters and an editor, as well as AP general office numbers in Washington, New York, Hartford, and the main number for AP reporters covering Congress, in what he called a massive and unprecedented intrusion into news-gathering activities. And I think his assessment has been echoed across all political spectrums and news outlets. Now, we're going to hear a lot of squawking by Republicans about this, and of course it's hypocritical, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a point. The president of AP wrote to Holder saying there could be no possible justification, and this is important, because while the Justice Department does not need a warrant, but merely a subpoena, which can be issued by the Justice Department, when it comes to media outlets, internal guidelines at the Department of Justice would have required that Holder signed off on this subpoena. However, there are also federal regulations which requires the Department of Justice to minimize the scope of any subpoena of media organizations. Now remember, there is no constitutional protection for media outlets as to their sources. However, the Supreme Court has provided at least some notion of special status to the media because of the implications on the First Amendment. There really is not necessarily a Fourth Amendment issue here in terms of unreasonable search and seizure. They only need a subpoena as opposed to warrant because they are not listening into the phone calls. But case law has found that just simply getting the records, if that's all it's isolated or limited to, can be achieved by simply a subpoena. However, like I say, federal regulations require the Department of Justice to both minimize the scope of any subpoena of a media organization and to make sure that all alternative avenues were completely exhausted to get this information. Now, the fact that it was secret, generally what happens in these instances is that media organizations are notified that there's a subpoena. They are given the opportunity to quash this subpoena. In this case, the Department of Justice justified their doing this in secret by claiming it would somehow impede the integrity of the investigation if they told them, which also makes this fairly uncommon. But it makes a much harder case to say that you've exhausted all alternatives to find out this information if you haven't even gone to the media outlet and asked them for it. Because that seems to be a potentially viable alternative avenue. What's also relevant about this quote from the AP president is that there may be some implication here that this is not simply about a story that was written about Underwear Bomber 2. But I don't want to get ahead of myself here. The chief executive and AP president, Gary B. Pruitt, wrote to Holder and said there can be no possible justification for such an overboard collection of the telephone communications of the AP and its reporters. These records potentially reveal communications with confidential sources across all of the news gathering activities undertaken by the AP during a 2-month period. Provide a roadmap to AP's news gathering operations and disclose information about AP's activities and operations that the government has no conceivable right to know. In other words, if this is just about this one story, you have collected data that goes way beyond that. The implication here is that either you guys are not telling the full story as to what you're investigating, or you have simply dragged a net that is far too wide. The inquiry, this is from the Washington Post, the inquiry is one of 2 leak investigations ordered last June by Attorney General Eric Holder. The second involves a New York Times article about the Stuxnet computer virus, which was developed jointly by the U.S. and Israel to damage nuclear centrifuges at Iran's main uranium enrichment plant. The 2 leak inquiries were started after Republicans in Congress accused the Obama administration of orchestrating articles intended to demonstrate the president's toughness on terrorism and improve his chance for re-election. Now, of course, we're going to hear the Republicans now complain about the investigation into these leaks that they called for at the time. But that's simply because the Republican Party is nothing more than an extension of Fox News. It's no longer the tail is wagging the dog, as it were. Nevertheless, the inquiry, according to the Washington Post, is not necessarily aimed at the AP, but rather the inquiry is probably aimed at current or former government officials who divulged classified information. Understand that may be the case, but this clearly chills the reporting by news outlets. Stephen Aftergood, a government secrecy expert at the Federation of American Scientists, says this investigation is broader and less focused on an individual source or reporter than any of the others we've ever seen.
Well, that's not good.
The Office of the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia on Monday released a statement saying it's not required to notify a media organization in advance if notifying them, quote, would pose a substantial threat to the integrity of the investigation. They're going to have to prove that, I would imagine. They're also going to have to prove that they exhausted any other alternative avenues to which to receive this information. They're also going to have to prove that it needs to be this wide. The story at issue included details of a CIA operation in Yemen that foiled an al-Qaeda plot in the spring of 2012 to set off a bomb on an airplane headed to the United States. Now, understand that the AP had this story. The backstory to this, the AP had this story. And it was dated May 7th, 2012. The attack that was reported on and was foiled was set to occur on the one-year anniversary of the killing of Osama bin Laden. John Brennan referred to this story in his testimony in February as he was getting confirmed, saying that the release of information to the thwarted terror plot was, quote, unauthorized and dangerous disclosure of classified information. According to its article last year, the AP learned about the CIA's foiling of the plot the week before the Obama administration, and this is the important part. According to the AP, they learned about the plot somewhere around May 1st. They were going to report it. The Obama administration said, please wait. We're going to make an announcement on May 7th. On May 8th. The AP ended up publishing the story the day before because according to the AP, it was assured from officials that it did not pose a threat to national security. Now, the Obama administration tried to claim subsequent to that it wasn't going to release this information, that it wasn't going to announce it. But it was reported that they were going to in multiple outlets after the fact. So that's a hard road to hoe. This, of course, is incredibly troubling because of what it does to the First Amendment and the press's ability to report on stories like this. Again, a subpoena to the media must be, quote, as narrowly drawn as possible, should be directed at relevant information in a limited subject matter, and should cover a reasonably limited period of time. By their own department's guidelines, it says the reason this is the case is to avoid actions that, quote, might impair the news gathering function. Because the government recognizes that, quote, freedom of the press can be no broader than the freedom of reporters to investigate and report news.